All right, so I'm going to do another little refactoring video. I don't really know how much I'll be able to do in this video because this project's pretty small, but a subscriber sent me a link and said, hey, could I kind of give feedback on this project? I think he's using Create React App. So I went ahead and I cloned that repo over, and I'm going to go ahead and try to run this. I forget how you do it. So let's look at the package JSON, and there's probably a start script somewhere. So npm run start. And first, what I like to do when I see a new project is I kind of like look through like the functionality and features of the project. So we got a home page and we got some tabs here. And as you go to the different tabs, there's really just one page that has like actual content. I guess he's making some type of anime something where you can have a global list of the animes that you want to watch and then details about them. So overall, I mean, I don't know how much I'll be able to actually talk about in this refactoring video because there's not much. There's just like one page with a subroute. I will say off the bat though, these URL structures are kind of strange. Typically we'd put hyphens in between like pages, so random -anime. It just makes a little bit more sense in my opinion, instead of having them put into like one word. And I mean, this works. There's nothing too much to say about that. So I mean, let's just look at the code and see if we can maybe find stuff to refactor. I don't know if we'll be able to. So the first thing, again, I want to try doing is just read through the code, make sure we understand. And I like to get a mental model of the routes that we're able to see and go to in the UI and kind of map those to the code. So typically with Create React App, he's probably using some type of router. Looks like here he's using React Router DOM. Look over here, let's see what version of React Router he's using. 6. Different versions of React Router do different things, so it's good to kind of check the version number. And if we were to go and look at the actual route definition, so I'm assuming inside of app.js, he has some routes defined. So right here we have all the paths to the routes, and this is how you get that one-to-one mapping of the UI routes to the components. So we'll kind of look through there. I do see he fetches data when the app loads. I'm not sure if that's a good approach, and I'm also not really sure what it's fetching. It looks like he's fetching all the anime data when the application first loads. So I think we can kind of fix this because we don't need all the animes when you first load the application. If you notice here, when you go to this page, there's no anime information displayed anywhere. And it's still doing an XHR request to the anime endpoint. So if you see here, I just got a too many requests. So I'm not sure why he's getting too many requests, but it's hitting an anime endpoint here. So that's the first thing. Maybe we can try to refactor that, is when the app first loads, we don't want to fetch the animes. We only want to fetch the animes when you go to the random anime page or the anime details perhaps. And I'm also going to refactor the names of these routes because I just don't like how all these were kind of combined together. So let's do that. Now, in order to refactor those, I first need to find everywhere that they're used because these are kind of probably sprinkled around all his routers. So it might be better to keep these paths and put them at a higher level. I don't know if people do this in practice, to be honest, but you could do something like this, export pages, and then for every page, I could say like, I don't know, random, this isn't JavaScript, so random anime page. And then I'm going to go ahead and put the route here. I'll call it route paths. Again, like I'm just kind of doing things off the top of my head. If you have a better way that you want to do things or a more common convention, like you could probably do that. But the issue I have with this is like, now we have all this other stuff, random anime. Guess I don't need to put that in quotes, do I? Okay, so we're going to do the same approach with all of these. And what this kind of allows you to do is that you can have this all defined in a single centralized location so that if you ever decide to change the paths in the future, which I actually want to do right now, you can do it in one place instead of having to do it in 100 different places. I'll just say like anime details. And I am curious like what you think about this approach I'm doing. Maybe it's overkill, but as your application gets larger, imagine you have tons of different pages and routes. And if you decide to change one of them, it's a lot of work. All right, so this is exported and we can actually access these paths in other places. I think we might have to refactor a little bit more. All right, so here we have a link. What we want to do is we want to say route paths to random anime. Okay, and same thing here. Just go ahead and say about. This is the dashboard kind of. I mean, I could just leave it as slash. Let's try to find, are there other links that are kind of doing the same approach? So find anywhere on the page where we're doing a link component. And it looks like we are mainly just doing it here. Although there is in the cards, when you click on the actual anime, it does have a link that goes to that details page. So going back, maybe we should have it, the routes be functions. I don't know if I'm making this overly complex at this point, but you could say routes paths dot anime details and pass it an ID. And at some point, maybe we'd come back and refactor all these, but this basically will allow us to dynamically pass in the ID instead of just having it like hard-coded there, right? So hopefully you understand like what I'm getting at, the benefit. Maybe this isn't 100% the best approach, and all my refactoring videos don't really show you 100% the best approach. I'm just showing you an approach that typically is better than what they have. So I think I refactored all of the links everywhere, and I want to kind of click through the application. Actually, I did break something, random anime. I did break something. Okay, so let me undo that. Let me just make another one called like go to anime details. Another approach I think you can do as well is like you could make functions that kind of call the React router instead of us like hard coding links all over our application. So instead we could just say go to the routes path anime details. This would take in an ID. I'm just going to do this right now. Again, like this is, I didn't really put too much thought into what I'm doing right now, but I'm just going to replace the ID with this. And if we were to call the go to, we could maybe go to that thing. Like go to anime details. I think this is what I'm trying to get at. Is that what's called a go to? Navigate to route. Maybe that's a better name for it. Navigate to route. This is exported. I'm going to call it. And I just want to clear stuff up. When I do refactoring videos, I feel like some people get mad when I do something that's not the way that they've read it on like a blog post or the way they do. I'm not trying to teach you the perfect way to do this. I'm trying to teach you a way that is a little bit cleaner in regards to like what was being done before. I think I called this something else. This is another reason why you should probably just use TypeScript. Like I'm kind of guessing at the function names. And, you know, you're going to forget the names of functions and the arguments of them. So I've kind of convinced myself that I'm just going to use TypeScript for now on. But okay, so now all the routes are working, and all that work, it was a lot of work, but the purpose of that work was I could literally just do this. And now you'll notice that as I click the links, I go to the same pages and my application works perfectly fine. There's no issues. Every route works as needed. Now, again, like you might have issues with if users have bookmarked your URLs, then you don't want to just break all their URLs, but doing some type of abstraction around your routes and your navigation will help you out in the long run. Again, I haven't really thought about this. There might be a much better way to do it. So leave a comment below if you have a different way that you kind of want to set up like a dictionary or a map that kind of tells you where your pages and your paths are. This seems kind of hacky, so I don't know if this is a good approach. Anyway, let's just keep on looking through. I mean, we could probably pull this out into a different page. Like maybe we could do like a routers page, or a routes page, router. I don't really know. I think this works okay for now. So another thing I want to look into is when the app first loads, I kind of mentioned this, we're fetching all the anime data, and it doesn't make sense if the user were to load your page to this. Like, why is it going to a page that has, we're not displaying the animes, right? So why are we fetching that data? So I would cut this whole thing out, and instead I would call it on the pages that you care about. All right, so I would call it on probably random anime, and probably call it here. So when this application loads, you probably want to call fetch data here. And also the use effect should probably be an on mount instead of passing an empty array. We could also say fetch data, which I think it should work fine. Let's just make sure we don't have like some infinite for loop going on. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. Go to this page, it's gonna fetch. For some reason, it's fetching a lot of animes. So I think inside this use anime, there's probably some type of function that keeps on getting created over and over again. Where is that? Use context of context. Like this thing might have to be an actual like use callback or something. Let me just make sure this is actually proper. Set anime list. I think it needs to take in that argument. Let's just see if this works. I don't know if you can actually do this though. Let's see. Maybe it's a use memo I need to use. I always sometimes forget if it's use memo or use callback. Fetch data is not a function. Okay, maybe it is just use callback. And I just need to pass it a single function. There we go. Yeah, I always forget that. And let's make sure that we don't do like a ton of anime requests. I don't know why it's doing so many. Maybe that's React strict mode doing some stuff. I'm gonna go ahead and turn that off for now. I mean, it's good to have a React 18 strict mode, although I don't think he's actually using it. So I'm trying to figure out why it's doing so many anime fetches. It should have only done 1, but it's doing like 4. And then we get like a 429 too many requests. So let's do a little bit of debugging and try to figure out why that's happening. And try to figure out like what's going on here. Did I forget to save the app? Maybe that's what's going on. Okay, that's what's going on. I forgot to save the app file. So now it only does 1 fetch, and it only fetches that data when I go to the page that needs the animes. And then if I were to go here, we also have the anime. Now I think there's a bug. If I refresh the page, it's going to crash because we don't have the anime data when someone were to bookmark this page. So how would you actually do that? Well, a quick fix obviously would be go to the anime details, fetch the animes here. But honestly, you want to look at the API, and maybe there's a way to fetch an individual anime by an ID. So let's go ahead and look at animes endpoint, and this is pretty rough. I thought I had a Chrome Json Previewer extension. Let me install that real quick. Viewer, add the extension, go back here, refresh the page, and now we get a beautiful view of our JSON. Now let's kind of look through this data and figure out what exactly we need to be looking for. So we get some symptoms, background, broadcast, genres. It looks like all of these things have an ID, a mal ID, and we could probably use that. Let's see what mal ID of 6 is. So mal ID of 6 is Trigun, which I remember watching as a kid. I remember it was really good. Trigun, here we go. So when you click on this, it takes you to the ID of 6. And really what we want to do is we want to figure out if this URL has a way to just get back Trigun. So let me try to say like, maybe I can put a 6 here if this is a good, okay, yeah. So really when the anime page loads, we don't want to fetch all the animes. We want to fetch just 1 for Trigun. And this approach to using like the use anime hook, I don't know if I'm a fan of it. I'll try to keep to the convention here. I don't think we even need context in this situation. I think this is simple enough where you don't need context, and we're actually just over engineering by using context. But one thing I will do is I'm going to make a new folder called API, and I'm going to make one called getanimes.js. I'm also going to make another one called getanime.js, and those could both export a function. What am I doing? Export a function called getanime, takes in an ID, and that needs to do some stuff to this URL. And then we're going to do the same thing with getanimes that takes in no ID and hit this URL. And we have this Axios thing already set up, so I'm going to go ahead and cut this out, and I'm going to paste it into getanimes. And let's see if this looks good. return the animes. Probably this needs to be an async function. And let's go do this. Go ahead and auto import Axios. And typically what I like to do is you might have like a config file here where you have export const base URL. And you can do this if you want to, you don't have to, but it makes your stuff more clean because as their API changes, you know, well, let's say they release a version v4. Well, you don't have to go through every single piece of your code base and like refactor where you're doing that. So instead, let's do some string interpolation, do base URL like that, and go ahead and try to get back just the anime URL. Does that make sense? So we take the base URL, append /anime to it, which is just going to pin it to this v4. And now we have a cleaner way to fetch the data. So I'm going to do the same approach for the anime, or for the get anime function, where I'm going to pass /ID here. And now we have a way to just getting back a single anime, which I could probably do that. Make sure it's async. And import Axios, import base URL. So now we have two helper methods that we can actually use in our code base. So I'm going to say const animes is equal to get animes, or await get animes. And I do kind of wonder why it's not importing that from API. So get animes.js, export const get animes. Sometimes auto import does not work for JavaScript too well, so you have to like have the file open so we can find it. But again, I was just trying to remove Axios from this. Like this doesn't need to know about Axios. Guess you don't need to know about memo either. And I'm kind of curious if we even needed this use callback thing, or if we could just set it equal to a function. Let me try this again and see if it does like an infinite loop of things. Yeah, maybe we did need the callback. Okay, so again, what we're trying to do, I know I did a bunch of changes for something simple, but we want it so when you go to like Trigun, the page itself just loads a single record from the database. So let's go to the anime details and let's try to find where this thing mounts. And for right now, I mean, what I would do is, I'm not, again, like I said, I'm not a fan of whatever's going on here with this context stuff. So I'm just going to use state. I'm going to say anime, set anime. And I'm going to go ahead and make that a useState hook, which is equal to an empty object for now. And when the app loads, you can also use like React query. This will also simplify some things. I'm going to go ahead and say get anime. I'm going to pass it the ID. So the use effect needs to be kind of dependent on the ID changing. And then I'm going to say .then set anime. And I think before this thing needed an anime list, and he's doing some weird stuff where he has an effect that always runs in every render and checks if the anime list is defined, map through it, find the anime that matches this ID, and then set that in state. This is not good. I'm just going to delete it, and we're going to try to figure that out a different way. And in fact, he does have an anime details already here, so like we don't even need that. I'm going to go ahead and do this. I think this should be fine, hopefully. We don't need anime list anymore. So what I want to check is if I were to go back. Oh wait, this one needs to be called get anime, not get animes. So let's go ahead and make sure that script's open so my auto import works good. Import it. And now when the page loads, hopefully we only do a single request to Trigun and we got it back and it's displaying here. So that's a kind of a cleaner approach. As I go to these different pages, it's going to only fetch the data needed for the individual anime. Now, you might notice that it's a little bit slower because when the new page loads, it has to refetch data and like it's a half a second before the image shows up. But remember, if someone were to bookmark this page and click refresh, you don't want them to fetch a list of like 20 different animes from an API. You just need them to fetch the one. So I do think this is a better approach. I am going to go ahead and just remove the context stuff because at this point, we don't need to share context. Like there's no point to doing that. I don't know. maybe you can kind of convince me that this is worth doing, but I'm going to delete it completely because I do not think using context in this situation is really gaining us much. Let me go back to app.js. And remember, we have a page called random anime, which used to use that context. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the get details page, and I'm going to follow a very similar approach where I'm going to have some state, and I'm going to use that state to fetch the animes. This is typically how you do it, like in React, if you're not using React Query or any other things. But I'm going to call it anime list and set anime list. And then I'm going to go ahead and try to fetch all the animes, which again, auto import is not working. So let's open that file and let's just go ahead and auto import that. We don't need to pass an ID here, but we can pass in the animes list. And we only want to do this once when the component mounts. I'm also going to check, are we calling use anime anywhere else? Looks like we imported here and here, so we don't need that. Okay, let's go back and let's verify. Okay, we do have some context going on. So I think in the index file, he had a context provider set up. We don't need that anymore. I think it was just causing extra complexity, to be honest. Let's verify what's going on here. So anime list.map is not a function. So we need to go back to anime list and try to figure out why this is not being set. Okay, because I set it to an empty I set it to an object. It should be an empty array here. So when this first thing gets created, when the state gets created, we want it to be an empty object. I'm sorry, we want it to be an empty array, not an object. And then we don't need to check if it's defined because we default it as an empty array. So we can just delete that. Let me go ahead and make sure this works properly. It is complaining. I think I'm missing a parenthesis here. What am I missing? Do I need 2 parentheses? Okay. Yeah, so let's make sure there's no errors. Let's click around some. So you'll notice that as you like navigate throughout the application, it is kind of taking a little bit of time to load stuff. This is a prime example of when you might want to use something like React Query. So we have some time. Let's just go ahead and import React Query setup. Just go ahead and add it here like so. And while that's installing, I think we can just go and figure out the quick start guide. It should be pretty easy. You just like set a provider inside of your app. So let's go to the app real quick. Go to the app. I'm gonna go ahead and import some of the stuff. We don't need all of it, but we're just gonna import what we think we might need. And then I'm gonna wrap the entire application with this provider. You can also put this in the index file if you want to. It's really up to you. I think it just needs to wrap your stuff. And yeah, so let's just go ahead and delete anything that we're not using here. So now that basically wrapping your entire application with this use client provider gives you access to using these hooks. So instead of doing, again, what I'm trying to show you is that like React Query has some built-in caching mechanisms, which will make your pages load quicker because the data doesn't have to like continuously refetch as they're navigating. So let me show you, instead of doing all this stuff, we are actually going to just use the use query hook, and we are going to call get animes, just like this. And I'm going to go ahead and say animes. This, if you don't know what React Query is or how it works, you basically pass it a unique composite key, basically a list of keys that it's going to create a place that's going to store these results into cache. I probably didn't explain that really well, but what people usually do is they'll put React Query here, and then you have access to React Query.data when this thing is actually finished loading. And then you also have like the ability to check if something's loading. So I'm going to say if this dot is loading, or if it's not loading, I'll just go ahead and loop over all the animes and show them. So hopefully this works. Let's go back to the main app and refresh the page. And click on refresh, and notice that nothing prints out. So we kind of need to figure out what's going on here. It is making a request to anime, and we are getting back some animes. But I think what happened before is that we need to actually get data. So if I go here, we get back the anime, and then are we using anything with the pagination meta or links? Let me go back to this random anime thing. Anime's data. All right, so what I would do for right now is this is kind of strange. We have to do data.data, I believe. And again, this is a great example of why you should use TypeScript. Let me see if this loads. Okay, another issue. I'm invoking this directly. I need to actually just pass it a callback and not invoke it. So let's go ahead and go back to the random animes page. Crashing. I think maybe it's not animes.data. All right, there we go. So all of that, I know I kind of screwed some stuff up, but just use TypeScript. I'll be honest with you, just use TypeScript. It's just so much easier to do stuff when it tells you when you're doing stuff wrong. I'm going to do the same approach with the anime detail. So if I can delete the use effect in the use state, and all this is going to come from state now. So I'm going to go ahead and say like anime. We can delete all this. I'm going to rename this key. This is important. Make sure the key actually has a composite of like a unique string and then the ID. So every time that the ID changes in your route, it's going to fetch a brand new anime from the backend. And what we could do is, as this thing is loading, I'll just say like if anime.is loading, I'm just going to return early. I'll just return like a fragment. I think you can return null if you wanted to. I'm not too sure. But down here, I'm going to say anime.data.images, anime.data.images. In fact, I think this makes it way too coupled to React query. So maybe we should just, over here, we can say const anime detail is equal to anime.data. And that would allow us to like not have to do this weird data stuff. Let's see if this works. I'm going to go back to the UI. I'm going to click around. And it does fail because we're trying to fetch an object here. So the issue is that getAnime actually needs to take in an ID. So I'm going to pass a callback here. And I'm going to pass it ID instead. So anytime we go to this route and the ID changes, it's going to rerun this React query, get the data, it's going to cache that. And I think as I click around, notice that it is a little bit faster. Whenever you go to a new anime that hasn't been seen before, it's a little bit slower. I just got blocked because I did too many requests. But if I go back to Trigun, that should already be living in cache and it should be really quick. So now I can navigate between pages. All this data is already cached. And there's ways to clear out the cache if you wanted to clear it out and stuff. But yeah, I think this is a much better approach. I mean, you can kind of nitpick on stuff and, tell me to do stuff differently. We could probably do something similar here where like I could say like animes data is equal to this. Kind of clean this up just a little bit if that helps at all. Make sure that loads. So it looks good. I think I saw one more place that I wanted to kind of talk about something. So if you go to the home page, you have like a hero component. I'm not really a fan of like what this is giving us. We're literally just taking a little piece of code and putting it into another function, another file, another place, just so that we can like abstract it and keep it clean. I personally would have just like pasted this here and just styled this directly, because the hero is not going to be used anywhere else. It's only ever going to be used on the home page more than likely. So there's no point, in my opinion, to abstracting this out to another component into another file, just so that you said that you cleaned up the code. What I would do if you really want to have like subcomponents, I would probably just put the entire hero thing. Like I would just put the entire hero component right here. Okay. And you might argue with me and say this is a bad approach, but again, like this hero JSX, it's not used anywhere else. So why are we making a shared common component? I know the styling might need to kind of come from somewhere else, but you could also put the styling directly in the app if you wanted to. I don't know. But let's see, where would this have to come from? So now it's on the home page, which means that we would have to load in what, details or something? I don't know. People are going to say this is I know people are going to say this is bad, but I don't really care. I just don't think it's worth having a shared component when it's literally used only on the home page. Like find a way to like not have to break uncommon, unshared logic into smaller functions and put them in separate folders just for the sake of having a components folder. I think it's fine to have a hero component, or just honestly, like what I would have done if this is my project, I just wanted to have made a hero component. There's no logical abstraction going on with the hero. It's just some HTML. So I don't think making a new component is worth doing. But yeah, I think that's all I wanted to talk about. I think we cleaned up the code a little bit. Let me know if you have different ways that you would have cleaned up this code. I think this was a pretty good project to kind of clean up and kind of share with you my approaches to cleaning it up. I don't think I looked at some of these other things. You can nitpick and say, oh, you should use Tailwind, or oh, you should use like Chakra or whatever, but CSS modules and CSS works fine if that's what you want to do. I would at the very least use CSS modules, which I think you do that, which would make all your CSS scoped to the component. Like if you're going to go through the effort to making these separate components, you might as well have the styles be scoped directly to them. Because I think what happens is it's going to load all this stuff and it's just going to put them all in a global CSS namespace, which can make a lot of bugs. So either use CSS modules. I don't like CSS and JS. It seems kind of sloppy. I've been using Tailwind for my project. It seems pretty good to use. But I would just not use this approach, because I kind of just explained why not. Anyway, yeah, if you have any comments of better ways I could have refactored this, or things you would have done different, naming conventions you would have done different, let me know. I'm also curious about this approach with the, a shared way to go to different navigation endpoints and links. Maybe it's a good approach, maybe it's a bad approach. I'm kind of curious. Anyway, join my Discord if you want to talk to me or my community about coding or trying to learn how to code. We have a lot of people in there just asking questions and helping others. Pretty cool community. And also, be sure to like, subscribe, leave a comment. Have a good day and happy coding.